What if I told you the government has a legal playbook it can use to take your stuff the moment a crisis hits? Now, this isn't some conspiracy theory from a dark corner of the internet. It's written directly into U.S. laws and executive orders that are on the books right now. Today, we're breaking down what those laws authorize, the 15 things the government has the power to confiscate first in a national emergency, and number one on this list is going to surprise you. For those of you who are new here, welcome. We don't do fear here. We do facts. Our goal is to understand the systems we live under so we can prepare rationally and intelligently. What we're about to discuss isn't a crystal ball prediction of what will happen, but a clear-eyed analysis of what can happen based on the legal framework that exists today. Understanding these powers is the first step toward real preparedness. This knowledge allows you to make informed decisions, moving you and your family from a position of potential victimhood to one of proactive readiness. The foundation for these powers is a trio of legal authorities you need to know. First, the National Emergencies Act, which lets the president declare a national emergency and unlock over 130 special powers. Second, the Defense Production Act of 1950 DPA, a Korean War-era law that gives the executive branch massive control over the economy to prioritize contracts and prevent hoarding. And third, Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, the main federal playbook for disaster response. Together, these laws create the mechanism for the government to take control of critical resources during a declared emergency. It's not a secret plot, it's public policy. So, let's get into the list. Number 15. Food supplies. Let's start with the most basic human need, food. If you have a well-stocked pantry, congratulations, you've made a critical first move in being prepared. However, you have to understand that in a widespread crisis, that stockpile might not be seen as just yours. Why would the government want your food? Simple. To prevent mass starvation and the civil unrest that follows. In a severe national emergency, think a mega-quake that cripples the West Coast, or a cyber attack that shuts down the food supply chain, the government's top priority becomes keeping the largest number of people alive. To do that, authorities are empowered to make sure food is distributed equitably. This isn't about punishing preppers. From their point of view, it's about reallocating resources from a place of surplus, your pantry, to a place of critical need, a shelter or a hospital. The legal authority comes from a few places. The Defense Production Act of 1950 has anti-hoarding provisions, specifically 50 U.S. Code Section 4512 says that to prevent hoarding, no person shall pile up materials designated by the President as scarce in excess of the reasonable demands of business, personal, or home consumption. The key phrase there, which is completely undefined, is reasonable demands. In an emergency, what you see as a responsible 6-month supply, a federal official might decide is in excess of your immediate needs. And a series of executive orders, updated over decades, grant the federal government the power to control all food resources. Executive Order 13603, signed in 2012, explicitly gives the Secretary of Agriculture the authority to allocate food resources and food resource facilities. This is a sweeping mandate that covers everything from your canned goods to the means of producing more food. Imagine this. A new bird flu strain wipes out poultry farms. Chicken and eggs vanish from stores. The government, using the DPA, could declare a food emergency. FEMA could be tasked with setting up community kitchens. If they get a tip that you have a multi-year supply of freeze-dried eggs, they could legally argue it's in excess of reasonable home consumption and confiscate it for public use. Number 14. Water resources. Just as vital as food, maybe more so, is water. You can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. This simple fact puts water at the top of the government's crisis priority list. Your stockpile of bottled water, your fancy rain catchment system, or your private well could all become assets under federal control. Why water? In most disasters, the public water supply is one of the first things to go. Earthquakes shatter water mains, floods contaminate reservoirs, and blackouts stop the pumps. When the taps run dry, panic isn't far behind. To maintain order and public health, The government has to provide safe drinking water, especially to places like hospitals. Your personal supply, no matter how carefully you gathered it, becomes part of the strategic reserve from their perspective. The legal justification is almost the same as for food. Executive Order 13603 gives the government authority over all water resources. That's a broad term that covers everything from public reservoirs down to your personal stash. The order allows for the management of domestic water resources as needed to respond to a national emergency. The logic is that water is a communal resource, and private supplies can be requisitioned for the greater good. And just like with food, the anti-hoarding rules of the Defense Production Act could be used against anyone holding what's considered an excessive amount of bottled water when others have none. Let's play it out. A major chemical spill contaminates the main river for a tri-state area. All tap water is now poison. An emergency is declared. Water trucks are brought in, but they're overwhelmed. Riots start at distribution centers. Meanwhile, you have 500 gallons of bottled water in your garage. If your neighbors find out, or a National Guard patrol happens by, a request to share that water for a local shelter could very quickly become a legally backed demand. They wouldn't see it as taking your water, they'd see it as liberating a vital public health asset. The takeaway isn't to stop storing water. It's to understand that a big, visible stockpile makes you a target. Number 13, fuel and energy sources. In our world, energy is life. It runs our phones, our cars, our heat, our hospitals. Without it, society grinds to a halt. This makes any private energy source, from the gas in your car, to the diesel in your storage tanks, to your generator, a high-value target for confiscation. The government's need for fuel in a crisis is practically infinite. Ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars need to run. Military vehicles need fuel. Generators powering hospitals and command centers need a constant supply. When gas stations are empty or have no power to pump, the government will start looking for fuel wherever it can find it. Your 50-gallon drum of diesel might be what keeps a fleet of ambulances running for another hour. The legal authority is explicit. The same web of executive orders that covers food and water also includes all forms of energy. Executive Order 13603 delegates authority to the Secretary of Energy to manage the production and distribution of energy during an emergency. This includes oil, gas, coal, and electricity. This gives the federal government the power to control the whole energy supply chain, right down to the gas can in your garage. The Defense Production Act can be used to force fuel companies to prioritize government contracts and to stop individuals from hoarding fuel beyond their reasonable needs. Consider this scenario. A massive ice storm causes a regional grid collapse that lasts for weeks. Temperatures are plunging. An emergency is declared. Fuel is now the most valuable thing on the planet, needed to run generators for heat. Gas stations are dry. State police are ordered to conserve fuel for themselves and for critical shelters. They get a report that someone is running a big generator 24/7. They could show up at your door with a legal order to confiscate your stored fuel, leaving you just enough for a day, arguing the rest is needed for a warming center for the elderly. They aren't stealing your fuel, they are reallocating an energy asset during an emergency. This really highlights the importance of having diverse energy sources, like solar, and keeping a low profile. Number 12. Private vehicles and transportation assets. Your ability to get from A to B is a form of freedom. In a crisis, it's also a logistical asset. Your car, your 4x4 truck, your boat, or even your private plane could be commandeered for official use. The government's need for transportation in an emergency is huge. They need to evacuate people, move supplies, get emergency workers into disaster zones, and get the injured out. When their own vehicle fleets are damaged or just not enough, they are empowered to press private vehicles into service. That heavy-duty truck of yours is perfect for navigating roads covered in debris. A cargo van can move food. A boat can be used for rescues in a flood. The legal basis is in both the Stafford Act and various executive orders. The Stafford Act, which is FEMA's rulebook, allows for procuring necessary resources, and that has been interpreted to include transportation. Executive orders on transportation management give the Secretary of Transportation the authority to control civil transportation capacity. This includes vehicles, planes, and boats. They can essentially create a temporary, conscripted fleet of civilian vehicles to help with the emergency response. Here's how it might play out. A hurricane causes widespread flooding, cutting off entire towns. The National Guard and FEMA have a limited number of boats and high-water vehicles. They need to run search and rescue, fast. They could issue an order to commandeer all privately owned boats and lifted trucks in the area. You could be at a shelter when an official comes up, asks for the keys to your F-350, and gives you a receipt, explaining your truck is being requisitioned for rescue efforts. Again, the Fifth Amendment suggests you'd get just compensation, but this might only cover fair market rental value, and it could take years to get paid. It's a stark reminder that in a major crisis, personal ownership can take a backseat to public necessity. Number 11. Medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. If you've wisely stockpiled medical supplies from trauma kits to prescription meds, you've built a vital resource. But in a public health emergency, that private pharmacy of yours could be nationalized for the public good. The logic is obvious. In a mass casualty event or a pandemic, medical supplies become incredibly scarce. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and the national stockpile might be slow to arrive. The government's priority is treating the largest number of people and stopping the spread of disease. This means getting supplies to frontline doctors and hospitals. Your personal stash of N95 masks or antibiotics could treat dozens of other people in a field hospital. The legal authority here is especially strong. The Public Health Service Act gives the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, broad powers to respond to health emergencies, including commandeering medical supplies. The Defense Production Act was famously used during the COVID-19 pandemic to force companies to make N95 masks and ventilators. Those same powers can be aimed at an individual. If you're found to be hoarding critical materials like specific drugs or PPE, those supplies can be confiscated. Number 10. Communication devices. When the lines of communication go down, chaos isn't far behind. The ability to talk is essential for coordinating a response and keeping people informed. That makes your comms gear, ham radios, satellite phones, and other two-way radios valuable assets for the government to control. Why would they want your gear? In many disasters, cell towers and internet lines are the first things to get knocked out. This creates a communication black hole. Emergency services need to talk to each other and to command centers. Ham radio operators become invaluable for off-grid communication. Satellite phones become the only reliable link to the outside world. The government might seize this gear to set up its own emergency network, or, more cynically, to silence information they consider unofficial or destabilizing. The legal framework is in the Communications Act of 1934. Section 706 gives the President the power to take control of any station or device during a national emergency. That is incredibly broad. Executive orders also delegate telecom management to various agencies, giving them the power to control or shut down private communication systems. Here's a scenario. A massive solar flare fries the grid and most modern electronics, including the cell network. It's chaos. One of the few things still working are older ham radios. The government, trying to restore command and control, issues an emergency order for all licensed ham operators to turn in their equipment to local authorities to create a unified emergency network. A secondary reason might be to control the flow of information and stop rumors. If you refuse, you're not just violating an order, but you could be accused of hindering the national security response. It shows that even tools you have for your own preparedness can be co-opted. Number 9. Firearms and ammunition. This is, without a doubt, the most controversial item on the list. The right to bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment, but how that right works during a declared emergency is a complex and fiercely debated legal gray area. From the government's perspective, the why behind confiscation is about maintaining a monopoly on force and preventing unrest from turning into armed conflict. After a collapse, when people are tense and resources are scarce, authorities might fear that an armed populace could lead to vigilantism and firefights. They might create a no-weapons policy in an evacuation zone or a shelter. The infamous example was during Hurricane Katrina, when New Orleans police went door-to-door confiscating firearms from law-abiding citizens. The legal landscape here is murky, but it was shaped by the backlash to Katrina. In response, Congress passed the Disaster Recovery Personal Protection Act of 2006. This federal law explicitly prohibits federal employees, or any agency getting federal funds, which is basically all local police, from confiscating legally possessed firearms during a disaster. Many states have their own laws reinforcing this. However, there are still major loopholes. First, the law is for legally possessed firearms. An emergency declaration could come with new rules that temporarily make certain types of firearms illegal. Second, the law allows for the temporary surrender of a weapon as a condition for getting on an evacuation vehicle or entering a shelter. Third, and this is the big one, these laws apply during a disaster under the Stafford Act. A different emergency, like one declared for insurrection or martial law, might operate under a different set of rules where rights could be more broadly suspended. Imagine widespread civil unrest leads the president to invoke the Insurrection Act. The military is deployed. The commanding general in your city could issue an order that all civilians must surrender their firearms at checkpoints to de-escalate the situation. This would be met with massive legal challenges, but the historical precedent for suspending rights during martial law does exist. Knowing your rights under the Disaster Recovery Personal Protection Act is your best defense, but you also have to understand that in the most extreme scenarios, those protections could be challenged. Number 8. Housing and real estate. Your home is your castle, right? Well, in a national emergency, it can be repurposed as a barracks, a hospital, or a shelter. The government can seize private land and buildings for public use. The need for this is clear in a mass displacement event. If an earthquake makes 1 million people homeless, the government has to house them. Hotels and schools fill up fast. After that, they'll look at other buildings. Vacant homes, vacation properties, even occupied homes with spare rooms could be designated for temporary housing. Military units sent to a disaster zone need to be quartered, and your property might be the best spot. The legal basis here is deep. The ultimate power is eminent domain from the Fifth Amendment, which allows the government to take private property for public use with just compensation. We usually think of this for building highways, but public use during an emergency can be interpreted very broadly. The Stafford Act also authorizes FEMA to provide housing assistance, which can include acquiring rental properties. And under U.S. law, a national emergency declaration allows the Secretary of Defense to undertake military construction projects not otherwise authorized by law, which could include seizing your land to build a field hospital. Think about this scenario. A massive cyber attack on the U.S. power grid leads to martial law. A large military unit is deployed to your city to protect key infrastructure. They need a place to operate. Your large suburban home, with its multiple rooms and big garage, is identified as a perfect temporary command post. You could be ordered to leave, or be confined to one room, while the military takes over the rest. You'd be promised compensation, but your property rights would be effectively suspended. Number 7. Heavy equipment and machinery. Responding to a disaster is hard, physical work. It means moving earth, clearing debris, and rebuilding. This makes privately owned heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators, dump trucks, farm tractors, incredibly valuable. Why would the government need your backhoe? After a tornado, roads are blocked by tons of wreckage. After a flood, levees need to be repaired right now. After a quake, collapsed buildings need to be cleared to find survivors. The government and military have engineers, but their equipment can be spread thin. The fastest way to get more is to press civilian equipment into service. Your construction company's excavators or your farm's biggest tractor could be exactly what's needed to clear a path for ambulances. The legal authority again comes from the Defense Production Act and the Stafford Act. The DPA allows the president to force businesses to prioritize government contracts, which can be interpreted as compelling a company to lease its equipment for emergency work. The Stafford Act gives FEMA broad authority to direct resources to save lives, and that can include commandeering private sector equipment. Imagine tornadoes flatten a Midwestern town. Highways are impassable. Local resources are overwhelmed. Under a presidential disaster declaration, FEMA could authorize the Army Corps of Engineers to lead the cleanup. They could order all construction and agricultural businesses within 100 miles to report their heavy machinery inventory. Your equipment could then be requisitioned, and your operators might even be conscripted to run it, to start clearing the roads. Refusal wouldn't be an option. This shows that your business assets are just as much a part of the national reserve as your personal supplies. Number 6. Gold, silver, and cash. In a severe economic crisis, physical assets like precious metals and even cash can become a target. This isn't about a mugger taking your wallet, it's about the government trying to control the economy and prevent a black market that undermines its power. The government's reason for seizing precious metals is to stabilize the official currency. If the dollar is collapsing and people are switching to gold, silver, or foreign currencies, the government loses its ability to control the economy. To stop this, they might try to remove these alternative currencies from circulation. It's also a way to fund emergency operations if the tax system breaks down. The historical precedent for this is chilling. In 1933, during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. It forbade hoarding gold and required everyone to turn in their gold to the Federal Reserve for paper money. It was a nationwide gold confiscation. While that specific order was repealed, the legal framework it was based on still exists. More recently, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, gives the president broad authority to regulate transactions and freeze assets during a national emergency involving a foreign threat. This could be used to freeze bank accounts, safe deposit boxes, and ban transactions in precious metals. Number 5. Production facilities and factories. Your business itself can be taken over, or at least its operations can be fully directed by the government. If you own a factory that can be repurposed for the national effort, you might find Uncle Sam as your new boss. Why would the government take over a factory? It's about mass-producing critical items. In a pandemic, they need factories making vaccines. During a war, they need factories making munitions. If a supply chain breaks, they might need a clothing factory to start making bandages. The government can't wait for the free market to slowly adjust. It needs to redirect production now. The Defense Production Act of 1950 is the main tool for this. Title I of the DPA lets the president force businesses to accept and prioritize government contracts. This means if you make something the government needs, they can jump to the front of the line, pushing your other customers to the back. While the DPA today doesn't allow for outright seizure of an entire company like it once did, the control it grants is so total, it's a de facto takeover of your production. The use of the DPA during COVID-19 is a perfect, recent example. The government didn't formally seize factories, but it used the DPA to order companies like General Motors to make ventilators. That wasn't a request. It was an order backed by federal law. Imagine a major war breaks out. You own a machine shop that makes high-precision parts. You could get a rated order under the DPA from the Department of Defense to stop all your other work and start making parts for military drones. You'd get paid, but you wouldn't have a choice. Your private business would become an arm of the government's war effort. Number 4. Intellectual property and data. Confiscation isn't always physical. Some of the most valuable assets are intangible. Your patents, your proprietary data, and your trade secrets can all be seized for the national interest. The government might need your intellectual property for a crucial reason. Imagine a company has a patent on a life-saving drug needed in a pandemic. The government can't let that patent stop mass production. If a tech company has a proprietary encryption algorithm, the government might need it to break enemy codes during a war. If a logistics company has sophisticated supply chain software, it could be co-opted to manage emergency supplies. The legal tools for this are varied. The government has the right to use patented inventions without permission, though it's generally required to pay reasonable compensation under 28 U.S. Code, Section 1498. During an emergency, they could mass-produce a patented drug and deal with the payment claims later. In national security cases, the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951 lets the government place a secrecy order on a patent application, effectively seizing the invention. For data, laws like the Patriot Act give the government broad access to corporate data, and an emergency could expand this to seize entire datasets or software. Consider a brilliant researcher who develops a revolutionary new water filter. They patent it, hoping to build a business. But then a disaster contaminates the water supply for millions. The government could use its authority to take the patent, give the plans to large manufacturers, and start mass-producing the devices. The inventor would be promised compensation, but their dream of building a company would be commandeered for the public good. It shows that even your ideas aren't entirely yours when the nation's survival is on the line. Number 3, personal skills and labor. This is one of the most personal forms of confiscation, the seizure of your time and skills. The government has the authority, in extreme circumstances, to compel citizens to perform labor. This is, in effect, a civilian draft. Why would the government do this? In a catastrophe, there's a massive need for manpower. They need people to fill sandbags, clear debris, drive trucks, and provide medical care. Volunteers might not be enough. The government may need to conscript people with specific, critical skills, doctors, nurses, engineers, heavy equipment operators, to keep essential services running. The legal basis is more tenuous than for property, but it's there. Executive Order 13603 authorizes the Secretary of Labor to create a national registry of individuals by skill set to be allocated for employment in the national defense. While it talks about voluntary agreements, it also provides for the conscription of persons of training and skill to staff critical defense industries. This is highly controversial and would likely only be used in the most dire of circumstances. Let's imagine an extreme scenario. A dirty bomb attack contaminates several major cities. A national emergency is declared. The healthcare system is collapsing. Under the authority of Executive Order 13603 and the Public Health Service Act, the government could order all licensed medical personnel, even retired ones, to report for duty at emergency hospitals. If you're a nurse who planned to care for your own family, you could be legally compelled to leave them and serve. Your skills would be confiscated. Number 2. Livestock and agricultural resources. For those in rural areas, your livestock and farm are your life. But to the government in a crisis, they're a strategic food resource. Your cattle, your chickens, your fields of corn, all can be seized. The logic is the same as for stockpiled food, just on a bigger scale. It's about controlling the means of food production. In a long-term crisis, you can't just rely on what's in warehouses. You need to control the farms. The government would need to make sure agricultural output is maximized and distributed according to a national plan. The legal power for this is explicit. As we mentioned, Executive Order 13603 gives the Secretary of Agriculture authority over food resources, livestock resources, and farm equipment. This covers every part of farming. The government can tell you what to plant, where to ship your harvest, and what price you'll get. They can seize your grain to feed a city or your cattle to create a strategic meat reserve. The goal is to prevent the collapse of the food supply chain by putting it under central control. Consider this. A multi-year drought, like a new dust bowl, devastates the Midwest. Food prices skyrocket. To prevent famine in the cities, the government declares a food security emergency. Federal agents could be sent to productive farms in other regions. They could inventory your livestock and grain and give you an order that all your farm's output will now be sold directly to the federal government at a fixed price. You are no longer an independent farmer. You are now effectively a contract employee of the state. Number 1. All hoarded goods of any kind. This last one is a catch-all, and it's possibly the most dangerous because it's so vague. The government has the authority to confiscate pretty much any resource you have accumulated in excess of reasonable demands. The justification is to prevent price gouging and black markets and to ensure scarce goods are available to the public. Hoarding is a loaded term. FEMA tells citizens to have a stockpile of supplies, but the line between a responsible prepper and a hoarder is not defined in law. In an emergency, that line will be drawn by whoever is in charge on the ground. The legal power comes directly from the Defense Production Act, 50 U.S. Code Section 4512, which covers the hoarding of designated scarce materials. The law says the president can designate any material as scarce. Once it is, it's illegal for anyone to accumulate it in excess of the reasonable demands of. Home consumption. What's a reasonable demand for toilet paper, batteries, or lumber during a crisis? The answer is whatever the government says it is. This gives them a legal blank check to seize almost anything if they can argue you have more than your fair share. Here is the ultimate scenario. A massive earthquake hits the New Madrid seismic zone, devastating the central U.S. Transportation is gone, the grid is down. The president declares a national emergency and designates dozens of items as scarce under the DPA: food, water, fuel, batteries, medical supplies, you name it. FEMA, backed by the National Guard, goes through neighborhoods doing resource assessments. They arrive at your home. They see your pantry, your water barrels, your fuel cans, your first aid kits. They don't see a prepared citizen. They see a hoarder. They could legally confiscate most of what you own, leaving you a few days' supply, arguing the rest is needed for the community shelter. Everything you prepared to keep your family safe could be taken in the name of the greater good. So, what can you do? It's easy to hear all this and feel powerless or angry, but that's not the point. The point is not to scare you, but to prepare you with knowledge. These laws are real. Ignoring them isn't a strategy. The solution isn't to stop preparing. It's to prepare smarter. This means being discreet. It means decentralizing your supplies. It means building community. Because a strong community is more resilient than any individual stockpile. It means understanding the legal lines so you know your rights, like the protections for firearms under the Disaster Recovery Personal Protection Act. Knowledge is the ultimate prep. If this video opened your eyes, hit that like button and share it with someone who takes their family's safety seriously. This is information they need. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Which item on this list surprised you the most? Your insights help this entire community get more resilient. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into practical, no-nonsense strategies for navigating this uncertain world. The power of the state to preserve itself and the general population in a crisis is immense, and it is written into our laws. The authority to confiscate everything from food to your property and even your labor isn't a conspiracy theory. It is a documented part of our government's emergency preparedness strategy. Understanding this isn't about fostering paranoia. It's about cultivating a mindset of intelligent preparedness. It underscores the importance of being prepared without advertising it. It highlights the need for a multi-layered strategy that doesn't rely on a single, visible stockpile. And it reinforces the idea that true security comes from skills, knowledge, and community, not just from the things you own. Because when a crisis hits, the things you own can be taken. But what you know cannot. Preparedness isn't about fear, it's about responsibility. It's about looking at the world with clear eyes, understanding the real rules of the game, and taking rational steps to ensure the safety of your family. Stay smart, stay informed, and stay ready.